Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. Today is the 20th of October 2021. These are the stories that we'll be discussing during the course of the show. We'll begin with the latest news from Afghanistan. But of course, as far as the aid to Afghanistan goes and the recognition to Afghanistan goes, there's still a lot of issues. Although our Prime Minister has said that all the money that was for Afghanistan needs to be unfrozen, all the assets need to be unfrozen. Despite that, Washington has rejected Taliban access to the Afghan Central Bank reserves. Apart from that, there's also the meeting that is held today, the extended troika, in which Pakistan will be there, Russia is there, China is there, and other important countries are there, and they are willing to provide aid to Afghanistan. But for the moment, Russia is not willing to recognize the Afghan government. Also, Turkey is not willing to recognize the Afghan government for the moment. At the same time, in Afghanistan, there's a lot of violence that's going on. A grenade was thrown at a Taliban vehicle in the Afghan capital today, wounding 2 fighters and 4 nearby school children. This is going to be our leading segment. Our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, of the day is going to be about the United Nations, where Pakistan has called for providing a reparation and compensation to the victims of the enforced disappearances and their family members in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir region. Also, in a statement during the interactive dialogue with the Working Group on Enforced Disappearances in New York, Saima Salim, who we talked about in the past as well, she's of course, she's a differently abled person, but nevertheless represents Pakistan at the UN. She said that thousands of unmarked and unknown graves of victims of unforced disappearances have surfaced in the Hill Valley for the last few years. Also, an analytical report that has recently been published by the Kashmiri Media Service says that India is hatching conspiracies to keep Afghanistan burning now that the Afghan Taliban have taken control of the country. And of course, they said that their agency RAW is involved in it. Then the next story is about this Pakistan Stock Exchange that has soared today amongst different news that are quite optimistic, whether it be the new ambassador, the new US ambassador to Pakistan that has been nominated by Joe Biden, or other positive developments. This has resulted in a soaring of the PSX that was up 802.72 points, or 1.8%. At around 1:30 p.m. this afternoon. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be talking about Dr. Rachel Levine, who, of course, the United States Assistant Health Secretary, has been now sworn in as the country's first transgender 4-star officer yesterday in the United States of America. The 63-year-old has been personally picked by US President Joe Biden to be his Assistant Secretary of Health in January, and her appointment was confirmed by the Senate earlier this year. This is going to be our last story. Let's begin with our first segment for today, and that is the latest that is happening in Afghanistan, whether it concerns the Afghan assets that are still unfrozen, whether it be the non-commitment by certain countries to recognize the Afghan government, and more. More in the following report.
As the regional powers contemplate to normalize with interim Taliban government in Afghanistan, US and allies face dilemma in the war-ravaged country. Since the Taliban took control of Kabul in mid-August, there has been a debate in Western power corridors on whether the group has changed its ways since it was in power more than 20 years ago. US and allies' official position is formation of an inclusive government and prevention of the country from becoming hotbed of transnational terrorism. In order to maintain its leverage over Taliban, US believe that it's essential to maintain its sanctions against Taliban by denying the group access to Afghan central bank reserves, which are largely held in the United States. Deputy United States Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo emphasized that he sees no situation where the Taliban would be allowed access to Afghan central bank reserves. The International Monetary Fund has already cautioned that Afghanistan's economic woes could trigger a refugee crisis impacting neighboring countries, Turkey and Europe. The fund underscored bleak economic landscape of war-torn country by issuing fresh warning that the economy will contract by up to 30% this year, which could push millions into poverty and cause a humanitarian crisis. Pakistan has persistently urged the world community to release Afghanistan's frozen assets, remain engaged with the new Afghan administration, and provide urgently needed humanitarian assistance to prevent a possible economic collapse. In order to avert humanitarian crisis, Russia, China and Pakistan discuss possibility of providing aid to Afghanistan as three powers discuss unfolding situation in Moscow.
Now we'll discuss the latest situation emanating from Afghanistan and of course how the world is reacting towards this country. We've been joined by Dr. Farah, who's a foreign affairs expert. Dr. Sahaba, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Sahaba, my first question to you would concern the world bodies and why they are not unfreezing the Afghan assets. Why is this this deliberate attempt by the powers that be to put Afghanistan in a corner?
I think, Omar, that's one of the biggest mistakes the America and the Western powers they are creating and having in Afghanistan situation, because it is leading towards humanitarian crisis at one side, but on the other side, the American presence, the American existence, and American relationship with the Afghanistan is also getting badly affected. I think, in my opinion, America should release the funds in a goodwill, so that will not only create a sort of better relationship and create an environment for a better American presence in the region, and at the same time it can also lead to solving the humanitarian crisis as well. Now the question why America is not releasing is probably it wants the Afghan government under the Taliban to bring them to their terms, but for that I think instead of controlling their assets, funds, and all, they can have diplomatic relationship and they can have diplomatic contacts with the Taliban and can negotiate what America is expecting them to do in terms of
but Dr. Farah, what I would like to understand is to which extent will the US go, or to which extent will other countries that are allied to the US will go? Wouldn't this create a huge humanitarian crisis? Because I know that there is a certain amount of money that has been pledged by the United States, by Brussels as well, but is that enough?
Well, that is not enough at all. But the issue is America, like with these small pockets of funding that they are providing to the Taliban in terms of providing humanitarian assistance to the Afghan population, is not solving the situation. To solve the situation, they need to release the funds. That's what they are not doing. And I think we also need to go back that where and to whom the Brussels funding and all is going. It's not going to the Taliban. It's going to all the NGOs established there in Afghanistan. And through those NGOs, they are trying to help and assist the Afghan population. But will it really happen? I think seriously no. So the Western powers, including America, they need to revisit their strategies towards their relation, the future of Afghanistan and the American presence in the region in terms of changing their policies towards Afghanistan. If they remain so
rigid. Let's talk about change in policies. When it comes to Afghanistan, a lot of pressure is being put on Afghanistan by the important countries in the West as to make the Afghan government an inclusive government, B, give certain rights to women and other minorities inside of Afghanistan. Whether we see a systematic change in the attitude of the Afghan Taliban, do you feel they can change all of a sudden as per the pressure that is being put by the West?
I think it's not going to happen overnight. And at the same time, if they want Afghan government under the Taliban to have female representation and all, for everything they need funding. For a smooth functioning and mechanism of running the mechanism of the government, they need financing. And from there, the America is stepping right on their necks that we will not let it happen. So America needs to show some sort of goodwill in terms of providing them funding. Of course, we all support the viewpoint that the Afghan government under the Taliban is supposed to be broad-based, where all ethnic groups should have their representation. And at the same time, women should and female representation should also be given importance. But all what I suspect is, it's my opinion, that probably America is expecting that Taliban should include Hamid Karzai sort of people. I think that's not going to happen. If America really wants to Taliban to have some sort of strong government where the all ethnic groups and sects and including female have their representation, they have to work closely with the Taliban. And for that,
I totally agree
Taliban,
with you on that.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you on that. Let's come to Russia, where the extended Troika meeting is held today. And of course, China is there, Pakistan is there, and the Afghan Taliban's delegation is also there as we speak. Whereas aid has been pledged for Afghanistan, still, of course, there are certain conditionalities that have been put as to the recognition of the new government in Afghanistan. At the same time, there are certain reservations by Russia that have been put forward as far as the Daesh or the IS are concerned. And not once, but more than once, Russia has highlighted this to the Afghan government. Can Afghanistan control Daesh?
Daesh, if America, who was here from the past 20 and I would say 40 years, if America cannot control it, how can Taliban control it over a night? Yeah, it's not going to happen. It will take time. And for America, who had the money, resources, capabilities, potential, trainings, and all, they could not do it. So Taliban will take some time. And at the moment when Taliban are struggling with so many issues, including the humanitarian crisis that is developing and rapidly developing with each passing day, it's becoming really challenging. So in this entire situation, I would say is America is leaving behind huge vacuum. And that vacuum is taken over, as we can see, is Russia is taking over in terms of opening up negotiations and dialogues with the Taliban. So why America is providing these kind of avenues and opportunities for the regional powers to take over what America had in the past. And Omar, I also think about that America probably will never ever make it happen for a variety of reasons. And one of those reasons could be that America invested trillions of dollars here. Will it really, let other states and regional powers to take hold of the entire situation
but
where America
unfortunately,
invested?
Dr. Saiba, where is that? I mean, the amount of money that they have spent. I'm not talking of the soldiers. I'm talking of Afghanistan. What kind of development do you see in Afghanistan now that they have left? Almost nothing.
Yeah, nothing. They didn't do anything constructive. I would say it like constructive. I mean, they didn't do anything to raise the society and the population of Afghans from the ground to something really productive. They never ever give the set skills to the Afghan population, including the Afghan forces. So they always and always handle them with care and with some sort of facilitation where always and always Americans, the Indian forces, they're going to monitor them all the time and direct them. That's not going to happen. That's not that never helped the Afghan population and the Afghan government to stand on their own two feet. So at this point in time, when the entire population is fragile, when the entire economy is badly affected, and America being, still like sort of controlling the Afghan situation, where the assets lies in the banks of America, how is going to lead to the betterment of the Afghan population? Nothing is going to happen there. And at the same time, I'm also assuming that the way the America is holding on the assets of the Afghan government is setting a very different and weird sort of precedent for the other states to look into. So, for example, if my assets are in America, I can always be very doubtful about whether my assets are in safe hands or not. What if I have bad terms with America as a powerful state? What if they freeze my accounts? What will I do? How I will be leading towards running my finances? So it leads to a huge question mark for all those states whose assets are there in America. And probably they will pull on and withdraw their assets from America, and they will probably invest in those states where they can see that in the next 10 to 20 years.
Dr. Saiba, only time will tell how all of these things turn towards and how they move forward. Nevertheless, when we come to Afghanistan itself and the spate of violence that we are seeing in the last few days, today also there was an attack in which 2 Taliban fighters, 4 school children were wounded in a grenade attack in Kabul itself. If you go behind, 3rd of October there was one, and of course 15th of October there was a Shia attack on the Shia mosque. This is a whole spate of attacks, and most of the attacks have been of course done by the IS or the Daesh. Now you talked about vacuum. Is Daesh or the IS filling up a part of that vacuum that has been left by the US? I mean, I don't say in a positive manner, more in a negative manner.
Well, to me, it's not IS like suddenly is popping up as a very a violent group there. I won't say that IS was never a violent group. It was, but it was never a part of the Afghan territory, right? So suddenly IS is becoming a threat to the Taliban government for several reasons. They have been bring down here, landed in Afghanistan for a mission, for a reason, for a goal to achieve. And the only goal is to destabilize the current Taliban government, right? And yet they have not formed the government, but whatever the arrangement is there in Afghanistan. So destabilizing Afghanistan is in the larger interest Who is controlling the reins of the Islamic State? Let's leave that discussion. But for the hack of Afghanistan, Taliban, and its stability, I think it's all happening by design. The way they are targeting Shias, the way they are targeting various troops, the way they are targeting various mosques and all, it simply highlights that the larger goal is destabilizing Afghanistan, because the world has to see that Taliban cannot control Afghanistan. Though, in my opinion, Taliban has never ever got an opportunity to run the government, because from the very first day they are under pressure. They are not able enough
They were there
to.
between 96 and 2001, weren't they, Dr. Saiba?
They were, but I always say that the version of Taliban back in that time and the version of Taliban that we have here are two different people. And the earlier version, Taliban 1, if I put it that way, and the recent one, Taliban 2, so their training, their ideology, their orientation, the way they wanted to run the systems is completely different. They were all, like Taliban 1, were all the graduates from madrasas trained under the CIA, and their ideology was extremism. While Taliban 2, they are not trained from madrasas directly, but they are coming from the Western countries holding degrees. They can have good media representation. I think Taliban 1, we have never seen they having any sort of interaction with females, with women. But these Taliban, the Taliban 2, they are even sitting across the table with females. We have never ever witnessed that. And at the same time, Taliban 2 are more into diplomacy. And we have seen it that
all right, now Taliban are into diplomacy. This is what you said. Now, Mr. Muttaqi, who is the foreign minister of the current Afghan government, has met many leaders. He also met with the Turkish leader Mehmet Cavusoglu, and he wants to build relations with the entire world, quote unquote. And this is what he has said a few days back. Nevertheless, do you feel that the cooperation of different countries with Afghanistan is linked to their recognition of the Afghan government, or can the cooperation happen now and the recognition can happen at a later time?
I think so far, slowly, steadily, all states are moving towards accepting the Taliban government, in my understanding, because the formula, whatever happened last year in Doha, where America was entering into deal with the Taliban, whom they do not recognize as, a legitimate group, and recognize them as a terrorist group. I think that formula is no longer to process. So when the Brussels and the European, they're always starting, providing some sort of funding to overcome the humanitarian crisis, and other states probably will be leading towards to overcome the problems that the Afghan population is facing. So slowly, steadily, they are accepting and recognizing, no matter they openly recognize it or not, but it's like one step at a time. So they are moving towards it. And without recognizing and accepting Taliban, I think nothing is going to happen on the face of this planet and in the international relations and politics, because
right.
America has not only invested money here, and America has invested time. America has its own stakes, its own interest here in the region, and I think America will never ever let it go to Russia and China to get hold of the Afghan situation here. America has to cash it out, and for that, it's my humble request to America that they have to release the fundings to the Taliban government, and they need to create a goodwill there. They need to create some sort of arrangement there from where they can start negotiation with one another. And they have already in negotiations. I'm not getting this entire joke.
But to be very frank, Dr. Farah, if I had to interject here, I would rather say that the US, despite what we say or despite what others say, will continue doing whatever they want. It depends on how they modulate themselves in the days or weeks to come, or if they do so, because there are a lot of conditionalities that are related to their modulation as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Let's come to Russia. My last question to you, Dr. Saiba. Russia has certain concerns as far as drug trafficking in Afghanistan or from Afghanistan is concerned. That is what Sergei Lavrov also said recently. He said that the drug trafficking from Afghanistan had reached unprecedented levels, quote unquote. Do you also feel that the Afghan Taliban government can control this drug trafficking?
I think the previous version, as I said, they are the recent one are more refined. But I think they can control it because they believe in Sharia laws, and in that they believe in strict, rigid laws. So With that, drug trafficking can control to an extreme. So yes, I think there is a possibility that probably Taliban too will bring along certain strict, rigid legislation that can prevent such kind of criminal activities, not only drug but all the criminal activities related that is happening in the on the Afghan soil.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Farah, foreign affairs expert, joining us, talking to us about the latest developments in Afghanistan. And of course, the topmost priority is that aid reaches Afghanistan at the earliest, because there is a huge crisis that has developed and that could go to unprecedented levels if the aid does not come at the right time from the countries that are concerned and the United Nations and Brussels. We know that the US, Brussels have pledged aid to Afghanistan, but it needs to reach very early in the country. Now, our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the United Nations, Pakistan and India. Now, at the UN, Pakistan has called for reparation and compensation to the victims of the enforced disappearances and their family members in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir region. That was said by Ma'am Saima Salim, who's a visually impaired and differently abled person, and of course representing Pakistan at the UN. And she also talked about this in the dialogue with the working group on enforced disappearances in New York. More in the following report.
Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, ruled by Indian Iron Rule, has been the site of a bloody armed rebellion against New Delhi's draconian rule since 1990s. Despite outrageous state-sponsored brutality in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, indigenous freedom movement has garnered new momentum in the heavily militarized valley. A surge in violence in beleaguered valley recently has been triggered by a widespread crackdown by security forces, extrajudicial killings, arbitrary detentions, and orchestrated genocidal plots to change the demography of Muslim-majority valley. This systemic persecution of Kashmiris depicts that Muslims of besieged valley face existential threat under the Hindutva mission of New Delhi to purge the country of minorities. Despite the ebb and flow of global politics, Pakistan always has and will continue to remain committed to Kashmir's inalienable right to self-determination. Exhibiting its enduring commitment to Kashmir cause, Pakistan has persistently advocated at UN and other international fora for providing reparation and compensation to the victims of enforced disappearances and their family members in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In a statement during the interactive dialogue with Working Group on Enforced Disappearances in New York, Pakistan's Chancellor Saima Salim revealed that thousands of unmarked and unknown graves of victims of enforced disappearances have surfaced in the held valley for the last few years. This recent saga of Indian brutalization against unarmed innocent Kashmiris lends further credence to the comprehensive dossier unveiled by Pakistan last month, which presented incriminating evidence of Indian war crimes and gross human rights violations in the occupied valley. As neo-fascist Indian regime persists in violating UN resolutions and international law, and despite telltale signs of an ongoing genocide, the deafening silence of international community is baffling.
Now, of course, India is getting involved in a lot of brutalities as far as their minorities are concerned, whether it be in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir or within India as well. We've talked about this in the past as well, but Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is a region that has been burning, and a solution needs to be brought about at the very earliest. Usama Nizamani, who is a researcher at IPRI, joins us online. Usama, thank you very much to have joined us. Usama, how do you see this statement by Saima Salim at the United Nations, of course, concerning enforced disappearances of Muslims in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir? This is not, this is not a fallacy. This is not something that is hidden, or this is not something that is recent. It has been going on since quite some time. Why isn't the United Nations recognizing it and taking out a resolution as far as that is concerned?
Well, I won't be able to comment on the legal processes that may be involved in, passing a resolution with respect to that end. But as long as, the concern that has been raised by Pakistan's mission, in terms of compensating these victims, I think it's a very valid demand that has been put up at an international forum. The first things first, I think in a lot of these cases, most of these victims, especially those individuals, innocent individuals that are killed at the hands of the Indian authorities, happen to be the sole bread earners of their families. On the other hand, when the families are deprived of these breadwinners, unfortunately, they are at the receiving end of, in terms of a lot of exploitation. They lose their sole, source of earning bread, and I think that is a very genuine concern that has been put up by Pakistan in terms of at least compensating these victims, and bringing out some kind of justice to these families that have lost
You
their
talk
loved
of
ones.
justice to the families of the disappeared or those who are, no longer with us. But seeing what India is involved in, the way it is involved in, do you feel that that could happen at any stage?
I think we need to see it from a very strategic manner. And when I say strategic manner, I think we need to perhaps look at some of the options that we may have. I remember I did author a policy brief on this very subject titled Lawfare Options for Pakistan in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And in that, there are a few options that were highlighted that perhaps policymakers and perhaps victims could take in order to, to ensure that some form of justice can be carried out or can be provided to the victims, and can be also made sure to hold those individuals accountable that have been involved in the violations of human rights in Indian-occupied Kashmir.
All right, but the fact remains, Usama, that India does not allow any humanitarian agency, especially that of the United Nations, to enter. The UNMOIG has never entered Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, has never had the permission by the Indian government to enter the held territory. And then, of course, there are all the other reports that have come from the other humanitarian agencies that have had no impact or no effect at all on India as well. It is continuing in the same way. It has the support of certain countries because of the geo-economic situation of the whole world and their relationship with India. But the geo-economy, geo-strategy on one end and humanitarian angle on the other hand, do you think one supersedes the other when it comes to global relationships and cooperation?
Look, I think it may do to a certain point or to a certain extent. I think as long as national institutes of those countries are concerned, where the provision for universal jurisdiction does exist in terms of providing justice to victims of human rights violations, I think those forums are still available to those victims. And I think it is in some way the domestic institutes of certain countries which do rely on this option. I think they could very well, despite these expediencies that are being exercised by states for one reason or the other, despite that, there is still some ray of hope for the victims, and I think all hope is not lost.
Do you really feel there is a ray of hope, to be very frank? I mean, let's be very candid here, Usama. Do you feel that there is a ray of hope when you read all that is happening in the Held Valley, the number of killings, the number of brutalities, the number of lynchings, people put into jail, 1,400 people were put into jail recently, then another number were put into jail, and this goes on and on. I mean, do you really see that ray of hope? Do you feel that that ray of hope is linked to certain pressure tactics that other countries could put on India, or do you feel there is a ray of hope despite all of that because of some change in Indian attitude towards Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir?
At least I'm an optimist to that, and I do see certain hope in the sense that, one, diplomatically, yes, Pakistan can exercise certain options in terms of persuading the Western countries and international community, especially those countries, which provide a lot of primacy to human rights concerns, and especially given the fact that we're seeing a sea change. We've in fact seen a sea change that has taken place in India in the past last 7 years. Ever since Modi has taken office, we see this this urge to manifest India in the shape of RSS's Hindutva led aspiration of seeing India as a country which is cast in that image. But despite that, I think there are certain stakeholders within the international community that would want to prevent that from happening in a completely outright manner. But on the
But
other
Usama,
hand,
they
were
haven't
also-
yet prevented that from happening, have they?
I think that is where the pressure could, in fact, be built up. And on the other hand, I think, given in an area like Jammu and Kashmir, especially which is an internationally recognized dispute, I think that is where some of these provisions can be exerted upon over India by ensuring that A, the demographic change which India, especially under Modi, is so hell-bent on executing. I think that is where it can certainly be curtailed, and I think that is one place where Pakistan would need to, certainly take certain measures that could compel India from, carrying out those measures.
All right.
B, I
Now, Usama,
still
there's
think-
another angle to all of it as well. There's the brutalities and the human rights abuses that are happening in the held valley and within India, and then there's another factor of the Indian involvement in Pakistan directly or indirectly through the different tactics. Now, there's a recent report by the Kashmir Media Service that talks about India that is hell-bent on continuing to keep Afghanistan burgeoning through its intelligence agency, that is RAW. How do you see that, and do you feel that this is controllable by the Afghan Taliban, or do you feel this is the beginning of another episode of Indian involvement in Afghanistan, or the Indian involvement indirectly into Pakistan?
I think, again, Pakistan has had very genuine concerns. And I think one of the concerns which was eventually voiced even before Taliban took over Kabul was the fact that, Afghan soil should not be used against Pakistan in any manner, irrespective of which group does that. I think Pakistan has been quite very categorical on that point. And although I'm not ruling out the possibility that this may not occur in future, there's a very highly likelihood that, given that Pakistan has undertaken a shift now in its policy and has a more pronounced emphasis on geoeconomics. And I would bring back to my earlier analysis in your show where I said that, there is a possibility that India would want to curtail or somehow impede that development from taking place. But with that said, I think there's certainly a multilateral arrangement that can be worked out to ensure that the Afghan soil is not used, not just against
When you
Pakistan,
talk of
but against-
multilateral arrangement, Usama, it's a very interesting point. Which agencies, organizations or countries do you feel could be part of that multilateral organization? Do you feel the United Nations should be there? Could it play an important part? Do you feel the European Union could play a part? Do you feel that the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, could play a part? Do you feel that there's any other organization or country that could play a part in this multilateral forum that you talk about?
I think there can be different multilateral forums. I would not say one specific multilateral forum would work to that end, but say if I would prefer an order, I would say SCO beginning would be the first and the foremost multilateral body that can have more pronounced say on this matter and could come up with some kind of a collaborative mechanism. The reason being is that it has the inclusion of a lot of these regional countries which may be affected by a potential spillover of terrorism emanating from Afghanistan. And on the other hand, I still think that we certainly need some kind of an initiative under the auspices of the UN also. But then at the same time, I think there are certain areas where other bodies can also work, especially those under the EU could be of help also. But I think as long as we're trying to take head on the issue of security, then I think SCO along with United Nations could certainly play a very critical role.
All right, you talk of United Nations, let's talk a little bit about the United Nations. We know that Saima Salim talked not once but twice about Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This latest statement about the enforced disappearances is the second time that she's talked about it. But before that, she also talked about the atrocities in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir at the general session of the UNGA. At the same time, Munir Akram Saab, who's our permanent, of course, representative at the United Nations, also met with Antonio Guterres very recently. Do you feel that the United Nations could A, play an important role, B, persuade important countries to pressurize India, and C, directly talk to India as far as its brutalities are concerned?
I think, Omar, a lot of our emphasis has been on the UN. I think a lot of what we could do would, at the end of the day, would come back to us in terms of how we proactively play our part in terms of putting the case of Kashmir before the international community. And I think it does not matter in this day and age. Because I think power centers are so diffused, power itself and influence itself is so diffused that we need to reach out to a wide variety of actors in this day and age. And for Pakistan, it would require, taking a slight diplomatic offensive when it comes to, raising the issue of Kashmir and how critical it is to the
but when it comes to raising the Kashmir issue, Usama, hasn't Pakistan raised it enough times? Hasn't our Prime Minister talked at all the UNGA sessions? Hasn't our Foreign Minister talked about this to all his counterparts in all the different countries? Hasn't our representative in the UN also talked about it? And we are only doing whatever we can. What more needs to be done by Pakistan and by the important world bodies?
I think, Omar, as long as the use of the international and multilateral forums is concerned, we've certainly done that. I think what is more required right now is that how do we reach out to individual actors within those multilateral forums and the individual institutes within the multilateral forums that we could, or platforms that we could exhaust in terms of raising the issue, because at the end of the day, multilateral entities are comprising of these individual actors. So the more we proactively engage with these individual countries, with these individual platforms, I think the more we would be able to, bring some kind of amplified, proactive response against, India's atrocities or India's illegal measures in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So I think that is. It's actually towards that end where Pakistan actually needs to put most of its focus on.
All right. Now, finally, Usama, I'd like to ask something that is internal to India, but nevertheless is a very dangerous development. Now, the BJP is demanding to arm the non-locals in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir with weapons and make village defense committees with people who will be armed. Isn't that trying to create more disharmony amongst the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and trying to regroup and kind of make the divisions within the people of that territory?
I think I think that is a very important concern that you've highlighted. I think it could actually trigger some kind of a possibility of a communal violence in future between different and diverse segments of the Kashmir, especially between Muslims and the Hindu pundits that are residing over there, and also a minor but a significant number of Sikh population within the Jammu and Kashmir area. So I, for one, I completely think that this is a completely undesired step. In fact, again, I would say that, Pakistan needs to bring this, issue up at the United Nations, and also it needs to individually, communicate its reservations, strongest reservations, against any kind of initiatives, because I still think one of the reasons why we are seeing a lot of unrest, and I'm not trying to rationalize something over here, but frankly analyze the situation, is that since the very period when BJP has actually undertaken this move of carrying out a demographic change within Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, you've started seeing, this intense rise in the unrest within the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir,
and that is being perpetrated by the BJP. And I am sure we are going to see a lot of other developments that are going to contribute to further disarray within the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir in the days and weeks to come. Thank you very much, Usama Nizamani, of course, researcher at IPRI, to have joined us and to have talked to us about this issue of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, whether it be the killings, whether it be the enforced disappearances, whether it be the rapes, and so on and so forth, or incarceration of different people, or putting the hundreds and hundreds of people into jail. India is not stopping at making Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir a burning point in its country. Let's come to the last two stories very quickly. The first concerns, of course, our economy, and the shares at PSX have soared as the IMF talks are apparently moving forward. Also, the fact that there's a US ambassador to Pakistan that has been finally designated by Joe Biden gives a lot of positive hope or environment within the business community, and that is why the PSX shares have soared. At around 1:30 p.m. they had increased by 1.8%, and they were at 802.72 points. On Monday, the PSX had remained under pressure because of the delay in the conclusion of negotiations between the government and the IMF, but now that is going to move forward. There is more confidence within the economic sector of Pakistan, which leads to the increase in the PSX shares. And then let's come to our final story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns a transgender official who's been sworn in as a first admiral in the US Public Health Service. We've talked about it a couple of months back when Dr. Rachel Levine, who was made the United States Assistant Health Secretary by Joe Biden, and now she has been sworn in as the country's first transgender 4-star officer, and that happened yesterday on Tuesday, US time. And she's a 63-year-old and was picked personally by the US President Joe Biden to be his Assistant Secretary of Health in January. This appointment was then confirmed by the Senate recently. She was also the highest ranking openly transgender official in the United States as we speak. She is now an admiral of the US Public Health Service Commission Corps, which is a 6,000 strong force that responds to health crises, including administering coronavirus vaccines and providing medical aid after natural disasters. So, of course, there is a change that is happening in the United States of America, that is the recognition of the transgender community and the LGBT plus community as well. So, let's see where that brings US to, because there's still a lot of things that need to be resolved within the communities in the United States of America, but of course this comes as a very positive change in that regard. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new stories and segments that concern you and Pakistan and our societies as well. Until then, COVID-19, dengue, take care, follow the SOPs and get yourselves vaccinated. Allah Hafiz.